Good evening. You can be opening your Bibles to Galatians. We're going to be in Galatians chapter 6, is where we're going to start out in a few moments in this lesson. As we've been studying through the Gospel of Luke on Sunday mornings and Wednesday nights, and you think about what it would have been like to interact with him. Some of the people that he talked to, like this morning when we talked about the rich young ruler and how the things Jesus said to him caused him to walk away with sorrow or sadness. Did Jesus do something wrong in that conversation? I think one of the ways that Jesus was helpful to people was by saying things that needed to be said, that when those people would hear those things, they would analyze their own lives and their hearts and try to see what they could do to make their lives more in line with what God has asked them to do. When I think about my biological family, Samantha and I and the 4 kids, I think I remember how simple it was back when we only had 1 kid. Or 2 kids. But at the time, that was all we knew, and it was challenging for us to have the 1 or the 2 kids because we hadn't been stretched any further to that point. But as our family has grown, there are certain statements that we find ourselves making, like, where's Hannah, or where's Asher, or Elliot, or it's a lot easier to lose track of where one of them is because bigger families become more complicated. I'm curious, by show of hands, how many of you used to meet at the old building here? Okay, there's not a whole lot of hands going up. There's some going up. But my favorite restaurant in town is off of Old Morgantown Road. It's called La Placita Antojitos, and I think it's the best Mexican restaurant in town. And it used to be the old A&W. And I was eating there this last week, and they've got these seats that look out to the windows, that look out at the old church building. And as I was sitting there eating this last Tuesday, I was thinking to myself, what would it have been like to meet at that old building, for this church to meet at that old building? That building couldn't hold as many people as this building holds. That building can hold, I think, around 200 people, something like that. And then 13 or 14 years ago, this church got this building constructed, and there's more people here than there were in the former building. I don't know what it would have been like to be in the former building. I don't know what the culture of the church was like back then or anything like that. But since moving into this building and having more people here, have you found that it's been difficult to keep track of everybody? Navigating the complexities of a larger family. Easier to lose track of certain people. Not always knowing how is it that I'm going to be able to get to know this many people. Has that ever been a challenge for you? And maybe one of the ways that we could respond to that is to say, you know what? I'm just going to come and I'm going to leave on Sundays and Wednesdays, but I'm not really going to invest in getting to know anybody because it's so overwhelming. Or I'm only going to get to know those couple people that I've always been friends with, but it's just too complicated to have more relationships than just the small amount of people that I'm really close to. In this lesson, what I want to do is remind us and consider some things, especially from the book of Galatians, to recapture or to remember or to recall the responsibility that we have towards one another as a church family. Sometimes in a church, people can think that, well, if we've got elders and we've got deacons and we've got preachers, which is one of the things that growing churches end up having, that those guys have to answer to God for the spiritual oversight of the church. I don't know that I need to get involved in the lives of other people. And I'll tell you that as our family has grown, and like Asher and Abigail have gotten older, Samantha and I, even though we're the parents in the house, we employ the help of Asher and Abigail, the older siblings, for a lot of things. Go get a diaper for Elliot and bring it to us. We'll change the diaper, but can you at least go retrieve one for us? We need the help of the older siblings. Do you suppose that it would be the case for the eldership at a church like this? that it would be helpful to them, that it would be helpful to all of the deacons here, that all the members have this mindset and this attitude that we are part of a family and we're supposed to help one another grow in our holiness. Look at one of these passages in Galatians that talks about this. Look at Galatians chapter 6 and look at verses 1 and 2. Brothers, if anyone is caught in any transgression, you who are spiritual should restore him in a spirit of gentleness. Keep watch on yourself, lest you too be tempted. Bear one another's burdens, and so fulfill the law of Christ. Now, in this passage, in verse 1, Paul's going to give two different pictures of somebody that's caught in some kind of sin. In verse 1, the first one that he brings up is this imagery of being caught in a transgression. Is there anybody here tonight that's caught in a transgression? That kind of terminology is used for like a predator going after some kind of prey. You know those old traps that would grab the legs of a bear or something like that, whatever those things. That's kind of the mental image that I get, that we've got an enemy, Satan, and his demons that are seeking to catch us and trap us. Anybody here tonight caught in some kind of transgression, some kind of sin that you keep going to again and again and again? Well, notice the other picture is that such a person needs to be restored. This same Greek word for restored is used in Matthew chapter 4, verse 21, when Jesus comes to the disciples, the first four fishermen, the second set of brothers, and they were mending their nets. It's the same word for restore, mending their nets. They were restoring their nets. You imagine those guys sitting there and sewing or doing what are those things that you, knots? Knots was the word I was thinking of. They were tying these knots to make it so that the holes weren't as big in it, so that the fish wouldn't get out of it, maybe adding some new rope into it and knotting it all together so that it could be used again, so that its purpose could be restored back to it. Is there anybody here tonight that because of you being caught in some kind of transgression, you need to be restored? You're not being used like the Lord wants you to be used. You haven't found your gifts or your talents, or if you have found them, you're not using them for Him anymore. All right, the follow-up question in verse 1 is, if anybody among you is spiritual, it's your responsibility to restore them in a spirit of gentleness. All right, so how many of you here are spiritual? Concerned about the things of the Spirit, concerned about pleasing the Father, that whatever the Spirit has said, these are the things that mean the most to us. And for anybody that's spiritual, the responsibility here is to bear one another's burdens. Do you see that this text is said not just to elders or deacons or preachers, but this is the responsibility to anybody that's spiritually minded? Have you ever felt yourself bearing the burdens of somebody else here? You spend time talking with them about some kind of heartbreak. You spend time talking with them about some kind of struggle that they're having in their life. A few months ago, I think it was in March, I did a gospel meeting in Somerset, Kentucky, and there's a lot of you people who know a lot of the brethren there at Somerset. And there was a woman at the church there that was a Christian therapist. And she had all kinds of book recommendations for me. We had some interesting dialogues about some of the work that she does. And she told me that I asked her, what's the most common kind of advice that you give to people who are struggling? And she said, one of the common themes that comes up in the advice that I give to people is I encourage people, you need to be well connected with friends that are spiritually minded that can bear the burdens that you're struggling with. Now, right now, we're in a room filled with people that love you and care for you and have different life experiences than you. In the next 5 days, well, let's minus Wednesday, but for the next 5 days, besides Wednesday, how many of you are going to be in a room filled with people who love you like there are people in this room right now? People who come from different cultural backgrounds, people who see things about life that you haven't seen, people who see things about you that you haven't seen. If we're going to help one another in these kinds of ways, it has to happen with proactivity. Nets aren't mended by accident. The only kinds of things that grow in your backyard when you put no effort into it are thorns and thistles. The only things that grow when you're intentional are beautiful gardens. Fruit of the Spirit, just in the last chapter. The only way that we're going to do that is if at times we're willing to have hard conversations with one another about things that we've noticed in one another, about sins that we're struggling with. The only way that we're going to do that is if we're willing and humble enough and courageous enough to have those conversations and receive those conversations. Now, let me be careful to say that this doesn't mean that we bring up every single thing that we ever see. Proverbs 19:11 says, "Good sense makes one slow to anger, and it is his glory to overlook an offense." Not everything is a hill to die on. And I think, though, that and there's other passages that talk this kind of way about love overlooks sins. I'm trying to remember the way that the New Testament talks about some of that kind of language. But I think in our culture, the way that we sometimes think about sin and being involved in each other's life is more uninvolvement rather than involvement. And so the course correction maybe that we need is that we overlook a sin, is what I was thinking. Is that we need to think more about how to be involved in each other's lives. And I would say that in the book of Galatians, Paul is modeling what it looks like to restore somebody. At the end of the book, he says that you need to restore each other in a spirit of gentleness. This is what he's been doing in the whole book of Galatians. And we'll say more about that in just a little bit. But I think what we're going to do the rest of this lesson is I want us to consider a few questions that we could ask ourselves before we would confront somebody or address something that we see in somebody else's life. Because the point of this lesson is not everything that you see, you go ahead and start confronting. But the question is this: have you been courageous enough to talk to other people about things that need to be dealt with? What are some things that we could ask ourselves that would help us with that? And we're going to loosely look at some things in Galatians. Some things will be outside of Galatians, and they'll be on the board. But here's the first question that you could ask yourself before engaging in this responsibility that we have as a family. Is this matter important? This thing that I'm thinking about talking to brother so-and-so or sister so-and-so about, is it something that is weighty? Is it important? There are some people, and maybe you've met people like this, that every small thing is a hill to die on. And those people are nauseating. In chapter 6, verse 1, Paul says if anybody's caught in a transgression, that's a sin. That's something that you can look at in the Bible and see that's not what they should be doing. Have you ever seen brethren confront each other over gray issues or things that are not a matter of sin? Things that might be okay to have conversations about? Homeschooling versus public schooling. Voting or not voting, the styrofoam Lord's Supper bread, whatever the thing might, things that are not inherently sinful, but have you ever seen people make a huge deal about something and act as if it's something that needs to be confronted? Look at Galatians chapter 1, verse 6. Look what Paul says at the beginning of this letter. "I'm astonished that you are so quickly deserting him who called you in the grace of Christ and are turning to a different gospel." And he says it in a couple different ways there in the first few verses there, that you guys are deserting the truth. Well, that's a pretty important thing to bring up. There's false teachers that have crept into the church. They're causing people to fall away. And Paul can point to book, chapter, and verse. I can see what you guys are doing is wrong. This is a serious matter because God says that it is. Well, somebody might ask, well, what if it's not something that's inherently sinful, but it's a weighty thing, like it's problematic? Like that person, the way that they are, I can't necessarily identify a particular sin, but they keep saying and doing things that's not good for them and it's not good for others. Would it be worth bringing it up in situations like that? Perhaps. But be careful. So the first thing that you got to ask is this an important matter? Notice another question. Do I know the facts? How many of you would appreciate if this was the only thing somebody did, is they at least got their facts right before they talk to you about something? Have you ever had somebody come to you and say all kinds of things, and they didn't even have the facts figured out exactly, but they acted as if they knew for sure? When I was in college, and I was taking my paralegal classes, and we had all kinds of law teachers talking about constitutional stuff and whatever, in my notebooks for school, for those classes, I had written down Proverbs 18:13. It says, if one gives an answer before he hears, it is his folly and shame. I remember the professors in these classes, they would kind of bait the students by throwing out a case, and they would say, what do you guys think? Is this constitutional, not constitutional? And there was always some student in the class that would immediately shoot their hand up and come up with a definitive conclusion before they had taken the time to learn more facts. And the teachers would always shame those kids. So I had this passage written there to remind me, don't answer too quick, don't answer too quick. How would you know if you have the facts right? Well, one way would be that you've observed something personally. This person has said this to you. You've seen this person engage in this activity. Maybe it's a report that you've heard. In 1 Corinthians, for example, Paul talks about the things that Chloe's people told him in 1 Corinthians 1, verses 10 and 11. I think in Galatians chapter 6, verse 12, Paul knows some things about these false teachers. I think he's heard reports about what these people have done. There was a time when Samantha and I were in college, and there was two little churches. One was a half hour away, another was an hour away, outside of the college that we went to. And the one that was closer was the first church that I ever preached a sermon at ever, or to, or with, or whatever. First time I ever preached was with this farm church. And there was a guy at the church there that was very interesting. He was hard to connect with in a lot of ways. He had been a member at that church for about 20 years, and other members had a hard time connecting with this guy. And about 20 minutes away from where that church was, there was the big city in the area called Rochester, where the Mayo Clinic was, and that's where the guy lived. And in that city, there was a gay pride parade. And the newspapers had covered this, and in the newspaper, at the front cover, there was a picture of the gay pride parade, and guess who was on the front cover? That guy that had been a member there for 20 years. And the members took that reporting that they heard, and they brought it to him and said, hey, we've got to deal with this. What's going on here? You're with some guy, you're in this parade. What is this? Maybe I can't get my facts down because I observed it personally, or I've seen some kind of report about something. Have you ever seen a brother or sister post something on social media that you're pretty sure is not good, but you're not totally sure? Couldn't you go to somebody and say, hey, you posted this, I'm not sure exactly what's going on here. Can you please explain to me what the story was behind this picture? Do I know the facts? Notice the next question. What is my motive? You have the facts down. You know that this is something that's important. Have you ever had a time before where you finally had the courage to talk to somebody about something, but it was only because they had annoyed you to a certain point, and now I got to talk to them? But it wasn't really because I'm concerned about this person. Look at Galatians chapter 4, and look at verses 19 and 20. As Paul is writing this letter to them, that's a very strong rebuke. Look how his love for these people comes out in this passage in Galatians 4, 19 and 20. My little children, for whom I am again in the anguish of childbirth until Christ is formed in you. I wish I could be present with you now and change my tone, for I am perplexed about you. Paul's making it clear to these people, I'm concerned for you, I love you, I'm in anguish, there's tears. If you are going to go and talk to somebody and they sense that you're getting your 1 pound of flesh right now, or they sense that you enjoy beating up on this person right now, I don't know that you're ready to talk to them about that. What should our motive be? Hebrews 3:13, exhort one another every day. There's other passages in the Bible that say, as family of Christ, we're supposed to be involved in each other's lives. But exhort one another every day, that none of you may be hardened by the deceitfulness of sin. Do you see that the sin is causing somebody's heart to get harder and harder and harder? And if something's not done about it, that person's going to be so hard in their heart that they're going to be like Pharaoh. And nothing's going to change them. Is this your motive? I want to see this brother or sister get better. I want to see them serve God more effectively. Or are you trying to prove something to them about your wisdom and your knowledge? What is it? Next question is, have I examined myself? Have you ever noticed that sometimes the people who are the quickest to confront things are the ones who seem to be the ones who never examine themselves? At least that's what it appears like at times. Matthew chapter 7, verse 5. You hypocrite, first take the log out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to take the speck out of your brother's eye. This is that famous passage that has this guy that's got a big 2x4 sticking out of his eye, and he's trying to surgically remove a speck out of somebody else's. I hope my 2x4 doesn't knock you in the head while I'm doing that. What's the point of this passage? It begins by saying, judge not lest you be judged. And this is one of those commonly misused passages in the Bible that, the Bible says you better not judge me. And the conclusion of this text is that you're supposed to judge other people. And this text is showing you how to do it biblically. Before you go and talk to somebody about something, you better examine yourself first. Why would that matter? Do you remember in Galatians 6, verse 1, where it talked about bearing others' burdens, talking to people in a spirit of gentleness, restore him in a spirit of gentleness? You want to know one of the ways that we have a spirit of gentleness? Is that before I go talk to brother so-and-so or sister so-and-so, I've looked at myself and I've thought about what it might be like to be in their shoes. It doesn't excuse what they're doing, but it's going to help me have more compassion. I've examined my own life and my own failures. You know, maybe also examining yourself prepares yourself to help the person. I've been at Bible camps before where there's confession circles, and everybody kind of confesses something that they struggle with. And I've seen this happen before where one kid confesses a struggle with pornography. And then the next kid confesses a struggle with pornography, and then the first kid is starting to instruct the second kid how to overcome it. I appreciate that he wants to be helpful. But the kind of person that has first removed the log from their own eye, they've equipped themselves to know how to walk through step by step. This is how you overcome it. You're trying to help somebody overcome jealousy. Well, if you've never done that yourself, how are you going to be equipped to help somebody figure out how to do it? Otherwise, you're just armchair quarterbacking everybody. If you haven't examined yourself first, what practical advice are you going to give to anybody? Have I examined myself? The next question is now the right time? Timing matters in these kinds of things. Is this the right time to bring it up? In Proverbs 15:23, to make an apt answer is a joy to a man, and a word in season, how good it is. How would you know when the right time is? I mean, if you're going to triage something, if you're working as a nurse and somebody comes in with a gun wound and there's somebody else that's got the sniffles, the gun wound person goes in immediately. There are certain things that have got to be addressed ASAP. But not everything is like that. There's some considerations here. Have you ever had a time before where you just had a bad week? Anybody here ever just had a bad week? And you said something that was not characteristic. You had some kind of attitude that was not characteristic. And everybody around you should know that that's not what you're normally like. If it was something that happened one time and it was not something that's even in a pattern for that person, maybe just wait and see if it develops into a pattern. Somebody's late one time. Okay, I probably don't need to blow up on them. Somebody maybe having a bad week, something like that. Okay, so that maybe would be one way to figure that out. Maybe another consideration would be, should I do this publicly or should I do this privately? And we might look at that and go, well, there's never a time to publicly rebuke anybody. And that's not true. Look at Galatians chapter 2. Paul talks about a time when he had to oppose Cephas or Peter, and he had to do it publicly. Without getting into all the details of it, look at Galatians chapter 2, verse 14. But when I saw their conduct was not in step with the truth of the gospel, I said to Cephas before them all, if you, though a Jew, live like a Gentile and not a Jew, how can you force the Gentiles to live like Jews? What Peter is doing here, Cephas in the text, he's doing hypocritical things that's influencing a lot of people. If there's some kind of public thing going on, it needs to be addressed publicly. I remember one time when I was a new Christian at a church, and there was a guy that had transferred his membership from another church. And I had started talking to him a little bit, and every conversation I had with him, he was complaining about how people in this church are not loving towards me. People are not reaching out to me. I haven't been asked to anybody's home for lunch or dinner. I don't think anybody here loves me. And my experience was very different. And there was one time when we started talking, and he started spouting off all of this kind of stuff, and I didn't know how to deal with anything like this. And one of the members of the church walked up next to me, and he just heard this guy talking a little bit, and this guy had known that this guy was going to a lot of people talking like this. And this member of the church looked at him, and he said, if I hear you say something like that one more time, I'm going to call you out from the pulpit. Because what you're doing is spreading a wildfire in this church with the way that you're talking. It needs to be addressed publicly because you're publicly affecting the church, unless you stop right now. And then, of course, there'd be times privately when it's not a public thing. How else would you know if it's the right time? Is the person going through finals right now? Did they just have a new baby that was born? Is there something going on in their life where maybe I just need to let it settle down a little bit before I would go talk to them, if it's not a gun wound, if it's not the high triage kind of thing? Notice the next question is, what is my relationship? Have I earned the right to talk with this person? Paul, for example, when he's writing this letter to the Galatians, he established these churches. Do you think Paul has got the right to talk to them about some of these kinds of things? And we got to be careful in how we say that. I'll give a disclaimer in just a moment. But Proverbs 27, verse 6 says, faithful are the wounds of a friend. Profuse are the kisses of an enemy. This passage assumes that when you've got somebody that's going to come and talk to you about something serious, that there's some kind of a friendship. We've developed some kind of trust with each other. But let me give this disclaimer. Paul in the book of Acts, when he goes and he preaches the gospel to different people, does he wait to become best friends with people before he ever challenges them? No, that doesn't happen. And is there a sense in which in this room, we're not super close to everybody, but we're all brothers and sisters? There's a sense in which we've all earned the right by the unity of the Spirit to be able to talk to each other about things, but some of us maybe have developed the kind of attitude and reputation that says every time you talk to him or her, they just brush it off and act like you don't know nothing. You know nothing, whatever. Don't develop that kind of reputation. As brothers and sisters, we've earned a right to talk to one another, but now the degree to which you know somebody might affect the way that you approach it, and you'd have to use discernment in that. Here's the last consideration. Have I prayed? In James chapter 1, verse 5, if any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask God who gives generously to all without reproach, and it will be given him. Now, in this context of James, this is talking about Christians going through trials and suffering. But there's things like in chapter 4, these Christians are not getting along with each other. They would need wisdom and how they would deal with some of this stuff. I love how this text says that God will give without reproach. Have you ever asked somebody repeatedly something because it just wasn't clicking? And you're like, hey, let me ask you one more time. I'm not understanding this. And they just get to a point where they're frustrated with you and they've got no patience for you anymore. God will give generously, without reproach. You can go to him again and again, 1,000 times in one day, and he'll keep shoveling out the wisdom to you, but you got to ask him for it. Now, I'm going to put the list up here. these questions that we've considered. Is it important? Do I know the facts? What is my motive? Have I examined myself? Is now the right time? What is my relationship? And have I prayed? What would happen if every single one of us in this room had this kind of intentionality for the spiritual well-being of one another? How many more men would be getting themselves ready to be an elder? How many more women would be getting equipped to teach classes and to serve in different ways? How many of us would be strengthened by one another? I'm not saying that our mission is to go and be sandpaper to everybody, but I'm saying that the Scriptures demand and expect that one of the ways that we help one another is by pointing out weaknesses that we've seen that maybe you haven't. And we do this in a spirit of gentleness. The receiver's got to be humble. There's all of those kinds of things. But if we're supposed to be a family, this goes beyond saying happy birthday and happy anniversary. It has to get into how we're doing with one another spiritually. And the answer to this is not just, okay, well, we'll spend more time with each other. Guess who spent a lot of time with each other in the wilderness, and they all encouraged each other to die? The Israelites in the wilderness. Complain about this and that. The kind of time we need to spend with each other needs to be intentional so that gardens grow, so that the fruit of the Spirit grows. If there's anybody here tonight that's not been following the Lord like they need to, let people in this room help you. And if you're somebody here that's spiritually minded and you're in a good place right now, look out for people that need help. This is not just the role of elders or preachers or deacons. This is the responsibility that we all have towards one another. We're about to sing this song, There is Power in the Blood. And it's by the blood of Christ that He's given us this family that's supposed to help one another. If there's anybody that has any needs, please come forward while we stand and while we sing.